Welcome to Epic Begins with One Step Forward, the podcast that reveals how to plan, achieve, and enjoy the journey of creating epic results in your life, business, health, and relationships. Here's your host, best-selling author and motivational speaker, Zander Sprague.
Hello, epic people, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward. I'm your host, Zander Sprague, and today I am so excited to be joined by Kerry Damiano. Kerry, tell us a little about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Kerry Damiano, as you said, and I'm Ms. World Traveler. So I have a YouTube series about travel and shopping, and we try and inspire women to travel and shop local. So we feature women artists, designers, entrepreneurs, that kind of thing, all trying to get women involved in going somewhere and then, shopping local.
Cool. Well, that's exciting. I love travel myself. I've been fortunate to travel to many places. So I'm sure we're going to talk a little about, have you been here or what would you recommend? I mean, one of my big things I talk about are epic destinations. Those places that are like, oh my gosh, they're so exciting. There's great things. Yeah, like things to see, and both, domestically and internationally. I think sometimes I say epic destinations that people go right into international, which is always great. But you want to know what? Here in the United States, there are so many beautiful, fascinating places.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
How many countries have you visited?
Well, I stopped counting at 130.
Wow.
So I've been to more than that, but this is over like 40 years.
Sure.
So yeah, so it doesn't happen overnight, as you know. So it's a lifetime of enjoying the adventure of travel.
Absolutely. And what is it about travel that really excites you, floats your boat?
The number one thing is that it's my continuing education. I love learning about history. History comes alive when you go somewhere and you see it. I enjoyed history when I was in school, but it wasn't alive. And it isn't until you go and you experience it and you see it, then you go, that it starts to make sense. You see the story. And so, it's something that you can learn from everywhere you go and every time you go.
Absolutely. Now, I a few years ago took my daughters to Europe, and I had this sort of epiphany, which was that for American, I want your opinion on this. For Americans, when we go to Europe, we visit churches and museums, and that's how we're seeing Europe. Not entirely, but my daughters were like, "The churches are great, but how many churches do we need to see, Dad? How many museums do we need to go to?"
Hear that a lot. Well, churches are like free museums.
Oh, they are.
They're full of art and architecture and history, which is what you're seeing when you go to a museum.
Absolutely. One of the places that I got to travel to, and maybe you have you been to Malta yet?
Yes, but I would say it was in the early 90s or late 80s, maybe. It's been a while.
I gotta say, I love history too, and I was beyond fascinated by the depth of history in Malta. And for my listeners who don't know, Malta is located in the Mediterranean. It is a fairly tiny island nation. It's off the coast of Sicily. But there's so much history that's involved with Malta. It's mind-blowing. From limestone temples that were aligned to the sun for the solstices, built like 3,000 years before the pyramids. And then there's obviously Gozo, which is an island just off of Malta, which was supposed to be part of the Iliad. That's where the siren was tempting in Ulysses, I believe. So my question is, when you went to Malta, what were the historical things that you saw that you were like, wow, that's cool?
Well, you know what, Xander? After a certain age, you can't remember all the things that you have
Okay,
seen.
no problem.
And it has been a while. But what I love what you're talking about, the depth of history, because truly, no matter where you go, you can find that if you will just spend a moment to do it. Right. So instead of it just being, like you said, sort of the surface things, understand first time you go, it has to be.
Sure.
You can't go to Paris and not see the Eiffel Tower.
Of course.
So the first time you go, you do have to get the low hanging fruit. But after you've done it for a while, then there's like a secondary level that you can really sink your teeth into some of those more historical things.
Absolutely. So, Kerry, what would you say, and this is going to be a hard question for Miss
Okay, I'm
World
ready.
Traveler, what would you say are your top 2 or 3 most favorite places that you've got to visit?
Mm. Well, everyone says Paris, but okay, I do have to say Paris only because it had been kind of a bucket list thing for me to want to go and live there,
Okay.
and live like a local. And I was hoping for 3 to 6 months. I couldn't get that amount of time away. So last year I was able to carve out 5 weeks. And the beauty of that is it was probably my 6th or 7th time there. So I wasn't trying to see any tourist things.
Sure.
I was living like a local. And that meant, having an apartment, shopping every day at the grocery store, making meals. And it also afforded me the ability to go into neighborhoods I never would have gotten to see. If you're there for 3 or 4 days, you're hitting all the,
Yeah.
the top things. But if you're there for 5 weeks, then you truly can get out into the, not on the beaten track,
Definitely.
types of places. And so that's obviously one of my favorites because I got to delve deep. And then,
Absolutely.
and then I have some favorites for other reasons. So the first time I went to New Zealand was probably 25 years ago. And I've always said for the last 25 years that it was my favorite place for the friendliness of the people.
Absolutely.
And then I was just there shooting the show in November, December timeframe. And it's still true today. They're still just amazingly friendly people.
Absolutely. I've been fortunate to go to New Zealand myself also many years ago, but what I found was, especially the South Island, was so spectacularly beautiful. And I kind of had pictures of the Fox Glacier, but I didn't have a lot. And I remember my parents were like, well, why don't you have more pictures? I'm like, okay, so when you have this huge panorama and you look through your camera and have this, you're like, yeah, no, I can't, I'm not going to be able to show you what this is.
Yes.
So yeah, I love
About
New.
experiencing it too. I mean, the camera doesn't capture the grandeur, the feeling of the majesty that you are seeing. And so, rather than try and capture it here, right?
Definitely.
In your eyes. And then it sort of stays with you ever.
Absolutely. And of course, nowadays, if you have a phone, you have a camera, you probably take a video, so you can do the whole panorama. And no, it's not going to capture everything, but it may do a better job. And back in the
Right.
day, you're like, I only have so many rolls
Kodak
of
and
film,
cinematic.
and what do oh my gosh, and you get home and then you're like, well, I have 25 slides of this glacier, and people are like, yeah, we already saw it, we don't need to see anymore. So absolutely. um any other places that you've been that you're like, oh my gosh, such an epic destination?
Would say for shock value,
Yeah.
Egypt. I
Okay.
was there in 1993, and the heat was shocking. The lack of sanitation was shocking, which meant that there were flies. And I remember we were on a bus tour, and they took us to an outdoor restaurant. And you would set your soda can or soda bottle out,
Yeah.
and it would immediately be covered with flies. I mean, turn black with flies on it.
Sure.
So you had to go like this to try and keep the flies off while you're trying to eat your dinner. And
And the flies are all over your food. And
are all
Oh,
here. So it was just a shocking place, but the incredible things that they did in history that almost lends itself to the shock value. So it's not a place for everybody, but if you like that kind of thing and that sort of history, it's be prepared, mentally prepared for it, and you'll have an amazing time.
absolutely. Absolutely. And as I said, I've been many places. One of my favorite places to go is South Africa. Uh,
Ooh, okay.
so, I mean, people are so friendly, so welcoming,
Yes.
and who doesn't want to get dangerously close to animals that could potentially hurt you? But they don't. It's amazing. I mean, I've been fortunate to go on some safaris, and the first couple of times I'm like, that lion is like 5 feet away, doesn't care. You're like, how are we getting this close? Well, in part because on these private game preserves, the animals are used to seeing and hearing the Land Rovers. They don't pose a threat to them, which is good. You don't want
Yes.
to be a threat. And but you're like, wow, these animals. We're really close to elephants. And let me tell you, when you're sitting in a Land Rover and there's like a bull elephant, that's a very large animal.
Right. The talk about shock value, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
I actually do have a little story about South Africa. I was there in, I want to say 2000.
Okay.
So the internet was sort of just getting started. And we didn't, it's not like it is today where it has all the information that you need. But it was one of my first trips where I decided to book my hotel online. And
Sure.
so you could do a little bit of research. And so I stayed at this place in Durban that was, half a mile or half a block from the beach and had all these wonderful things about it. And when I got there, what they hadn't told me was that it was right in the middle of the red light district. And so you
Uh-uh.
go out to your hotel and you have all these hawkers, trying to get you to, come
Go
into
in
their
and see the
establishment.
show or whatever. Yeah.
So it could have been a terrible trip, having to stay inside my hotel the whole time. But I ended up going to lunch at a place, and some Brits, heard me speaking English and
Mhm.
started talking to me, and they sort of took me under their wing. And then they showed me some of the beautiful sights of the city, and it saved that particular, uh, you know, part of my trip for me, that I was able to talk to people who lived there and who knew sort of what to see and that sort of thing, and then I wasn't afraid anymore.
Absolutely. And certainly traveling alone can at times it can be unnerving. I've traveled places alone, and it's not always the most fun, but it does, I feel, if you're willing, open you up to all kinds of new experiences. And certainly my experience in traveling alone has been that sometimes the detours that happen are the best experience.
Very true. They become the best story, don't they?
They do, absolutely. And I had one. I was studying in college. I was took a semester in Australia, and then I was traveling. I was traveling on the spring break. I was down in Tasmania, and I was like trying to get places, and they're like, "Oh, you can hitchhike. It's really easy." Now, hitchhiking, and I did do it, and it was fine. The challenge is if you just care that you're getting from point A to point B at some point. But I was sort of like, I would like to get to wherever I'm going next by afternoon, because I want to see stuff. I don't just care. I had a bit more of a timetable. So what I did is I rented a car, which was like sort of, I thought this is going to be a big financial challenge for me because I was a college student. But it turned out that that little detour turned out really well. Why? Because I was staying in youth hostels. So by having a car, people wanted rides. So I didn't pay for the 6 days I had the car. I didn't pay for a meal, and I didn't have to pay for gas.
Fantastic. And you probably met some very interesting people.
Absolutely. Absolutely met really, really, and again, oh, you have a car. Can I get where are you going next? I'm going here. Can I get a ride? Or can you drive me?
Yes.
You're driving right through here. Can you, drive me to here? And so it started a lot of conversations.
Yes.
So
Isn't that really the thing about travel is that, yes, it's about what you're going to see and what you're going to learn, but it's about the interactions, the people that you meet, hearing their stories and sharing your travel stories, like we're doing, that really make a connection.
they do. And one of the things I find is it can be challenging, but get curious. Ask
Yes.
people where they're from, what they're doing, what they would recommend. Um,
Right.
because that's where you really get the gems. You get that off the beaten track. You get the don't go here, go here. Go to this restaurant's excellent. Tell them that I sent you or
Yeah.
whatever.
Uh-huh. Well, you're getting the real stuff, not just the things that are paid to be in the guidebooks or have advertisements in travel sites, right? You're
Absolutely.
you're you're getting into the secrets that the local people know.
Absolutely. So what are some tips that you have for people who may be going, "Ah, one of my epic goals is to go to wherever," but
Mhm.
someone who clearly has a lot of experience with how to plan and execute a trip and sort of once you get there, what do you do? Because sometimes you're so focused on getting there that once you get there, you're like, now what? So, what are
Right.
some tips that
Right.
you have?
Well, I'm going to start with just do it.
Oh, absolutely.
When I turned 50, I decided that I was never ever going to say again, someday
Absolutely.
I'm going to do that. So now instead of saying someday, if I say that, if I think it, I'm going to do it.
Hmm.
And that has served me well for the last number of years because I'm not waiting and putting my life on hold before I go do it. So I would say that's the first thing is if you're thinking about, I want to go to Timbuktu, then go, plan to go.
Hmm.
And then one of the other things, people ask me a lot about how to save money. And one of the things I like to say is to try and stick with one airline as much as possible.
Hmm.
Because if you do, then you can build up some perks. And so, like, I don't pay for my checked luggage. I get upgrades. If there's a cancellation, they're taking care of me. They're moving me on to the next flight. Some of those little things that are so valuable if you travel a lot. And that helps. It costs to go, right? It's not a secret that it's not necessarily expensive, but you're going to pay to travel somewhere. So finding these little ways that can shave off a little bit,
Hmm.
right? That's helpful. The other thing I would say is if you're thinking about going alone, is that you are in control of how alone you are.
Hmm.
So if you think, well, I don't want to be by myself the whole time, then join a tour when you get there. Take small tours, and then you meet people, and then maybe you make a dinner, appointment to get together, or gosh, I'm going to be at such and such at the same time you are. Let's get together and go do
Yeah.
something. Strike up a conversation with the person on the plane or on a train, or who's sitting next to you that so might be alone. I'd be very interested in making that connection. So there's really no fear of having to do it by yourself if being alone is the thing that keeps you from doing it.
Absolutely. And I talk about that in my book about basically just do it, right? I mean, the
Do it.
only way we get anything done is to say and make a plan. I'm going to do this.
Mhm.
Travel does cost money. What I always like to say is to the extent that as you start to travel or you've traveled in your life, even small things, under, understand what is important to you in your travel, right?
Yes.
What I always say is I'd like to stay in a nice hotel. It doesn't have to be 4-star because if the only time I'm in the hotel is really to shower and sleep,
That's
um, no matter how spectacular the view out the window is, I have yet to find myself just standing at the window of my hotel going, "Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful." So
Yes.
If you're somewhere that,
I'm right with you there, Xander. Absolutely.
it's like stay someplace. I'm not saying if you're fine with, a youth hostel or camping or Motel 6, and I'm not slamming Motel 6 at all, but just something that's like basically utilitarian. It's a room. If you're like, that's fine. I just need a place to lay my head and be able to leave to go out and see stuff. That's what you should do. You don't need to be staying at the Ritz or the Four Seasons. But if you're like, no, I definitely want the Ritz of the Four Seasons, and understand what
That's part of your experience.
yeah,
Right. Then you would be willing to pay for it, but you don't have, like you said, you don't have to.
right.
So that is a place where you can save some money.
Absolutely. And sometimes a lot of money. And obviously nowadays there's the Airbnbs and stuff like that.
Yes.
I'm
Which that really helps too, because a lot of those have a kitchen or something where you can fix food. So if you could just do your breakfast or your, after dinner snack or whatever it is, not out eating out, that's going to save you some money too.
It is. It is. I have to say, for me, when I go on vacation, I want a vacation from my day to day. So I don't want to travel somewhere and be like, all right, now I have to go shopping and cook and stuff like
True.
that. That's me personally.
Uh-huh.
But I do get. I mean, I've certainly rented Airbnbs and stuff, and it is great, and it does allow you to get out and find out what the stores or the farmers markets are like, and you never know. You run into people because you have to talk to people when you go into a store in London. You have no idea, where's I'm looking for ketchup. Where's ketchup? What's it called?
We're going to make a shopper out of you yet. Right?
Oh, I don't know. So you said at the beginning that you encourage people to shop local, and
Yes.
I do think that that's important. A lot of these places, tourism is part of how they are supporting the economy.
Right. That's right. Well, and I think that's important. I take that responsibility quite seriously. A number of places I've been have been very, very poor. Like, for example, Madagascar. I mean,
Sure.
it was just so incredibly poor. You can hardly imagine.
Mhm.
And of course, there's children begging in the streets, and they stand at your car window and won't go away. And they just keep knocking and knocking, and they won't go away.
Mhm.
And your heart just breaks
Mhm.
for them. But the way I look at it is, if I give to them, then they're out on the street begging again tomorrow.
Mhm.
So my responsibility is to stay in their hotels, eat in their restaurants, hire their tour guides, buy local handicrafts. These are ways that I contribute back to their economy to make it healthier, and support people without giving to someone on the street. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that creates a cycle. And then they can never get out of it. So, by being part of their economy, I feel like that's my contribution.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I too have seen that, and it is heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking.
We're only able to do what we're able to do, where we are, and certainly be conscious of your choices, of how you're supporting it. Now, here's something a little off the, kind of related but off, but something that I've been seeing lately, which baffles me. So I want your opinion as someone who travels a lot. Is I've seen some places like in Palm Springs, and I just heard this about Maui, where they want to start to restrict the short-term rentals, basically the Airbnbs or short-term house rentals. And I know Palm Springs. I love to travel there, and I'm baffled by this because I was like, why are you sort of cutting off the hand that's feeding you? I get people who live there. I mean, I look at both sides, but I'm like, but Palm Springs is, you think of going to visit, right? Some people want to live there, and that's great. But most of us think about, oh, I want to go visit, right?
Right.
what is,
Really, how long are you going? I mean, it's a short term.
yeah, like, I
Right.
mean, I'm going there for a week, or even if, and they consider it long-term, but, snowbirds, right? Want to
Yes.
be able to rent houses for
Mhm.
January, February, March, and maybe into April or whatever. But
Sure.
if you have all these restrictions, all of a sudden that whole that whole market dries up. That
Mhm.
has a ripple on effect to the restaurants that everyone wants to go to aren't there because there aren't the tourists to keep them going. And so, as someone who Miss World Traveler, I mean, what is your opinion sort of on this debate between obviously the local people, yeah, short-term residents don't care. There may be noise stuff, but I look at it and go, I'm trying to understand because I don't.
Mhm. Well, I don't really understand it other than I think what they're trying to do is cut down on parties and noise and things like that, which it seems to me that rather than restrict the rental itself, make ordinances for the noise and the parties,
Absolutely.
that kind of thing, which we've just done here in, I'm out of Phoenix, and in Scottsdale, they just did that. And so, there's no renting a place just to have a party kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
So that makes sense to me. But like you said, I'm not sure, like I go to a place and sometimes I'm just there for 2 or 3 days. You still want to be able to have a number of different kinds of accommodations to choose from.
Right. And I used to own a house and it was a vacation. I mean, I went to it, but it was, more of a vacation rental because I live in Northern California and I wasn't, easily getting down to Palm Springs. I don't own that house anymore, but I was like, wow. And there were noise ordinances and they were very good. They were working very, very well to root out the people who were, renting to people who was just having loud parties. They lost their rental license very quickly, which is good. I mean,
Right.
one or two bad apples ruin it for everyone. But I read this
Exactly.
thing about with Maui that they want to restrict that, the short-term rentals. And I was like, but Maui, that's tourism is what you
That's
do.
what it is, right?
It doesn't like I'm baffled. So
Yeah.
someone who's traveled around, it's just again, and you don't have to have any particular opinion. I was just like, hmm,
Mhm.
if that's where a lot of your money comes from, why would you make it harder for people to come travel? Because then it will get more expensive, which means that less people are able to come
Right.
and you don't have
Right.
like it just has this knock-on effect that I was like, how are people not seeing that?
Well, really, you want to think about things being visitor friendly. And I'm sure you've been lots of places that you go in and they're not visitor friendly. And I
Yes.
don't mean just in terms of accommodation, but signage, being able to make your way around, um, uh, like enough public bathrooms. I mean, there's lots of things that make a place not visitor friendly, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, and not information that helps you to make sure that as a tourist you're not uh stepping on um cultural norms, toes. You
Right.
inadvertently do something that you're unaware is a no-no, or just
Mhm.
you've just
Mhm.
sort of offended someone when you didn't intend to. I mean, an
Right.
example might be if you're traveling someplace that there's a strong Muslim population and women should cover their head a little. Not hard to take a scarf and put it over your head, but if you don't know, you go out and go, oh well, okay, and all of a sudden people are feel offended, and you're like, well, I didn't intend to do that. So, you know.
Right. Has to do with research. And going back to the question you asked earlier about some of the tips,
Yeah.
one of the things I do a lot of research before I go somewhere, even if I've been there before. And that's just, where to go. You don't want to miss anything important because I didn't know to
Yeah.
see it, right? And certainly as Ms. World Traveler, our time is very limited. we go in, I shop the whole city in 2 days, write a script, make a story, we film in one day, and then we move on to the next place.
Yep.
So it happens very, very fast. And so I have to hit the ground running. And because it's sort of, that's become a way that I operate, I do that for any other trips as well. That I want to know what I'm getting into. And it's that I'm relying on the internet to tell me. It's more that it just gives me like a running start.
Absolutely.
And then, then I get there and then I can see and pivot if I need to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do absolutely agree. The information's fairly easy to get these days. A simple Google search on Istanbul restaurants or whatever, you'll
Right.
get it. YouTube, a great place to go watch people who are creating travel vlogs, travel channels like yours, where I could watch you and go, oh, look at that. Miss World
Right.
Traveler says that this restaurant is really good, or she goes and says, I heard great things. Maybe it was an off night, but
Sure.
the food was okay, but it wasn't what I expected. Or, oh my
Yes.
gosh, I just was hungry and I went into this restaurant and the food was phenomenal. So
Right. Right. Well, I'm glad you brought up travel bloggers because, there are thousands of them out there. And I think it's a good thing, again, if you want to travel regularly, to follow, a couple of your favorites who like to travel the way that you do.
yes,
My shtick of being, Ms. World Traveler is because nobody else is doing exactly the same thing. I'm focused on shopping, style, fashion, art, that sort of thing, which is just different. So I'm not giving recommendations about where to stay or hotels or what to do because there are many, many people there doing that. And so if you find one of those that you really like, then you can get a lot of information before you go. And I think that's a great part of your research.
absolutely. Now we're coming to the end of our time, but I'd love to ask all my guests this. There are two words that for me are so powerful, so full of optimism, and especially when it comes to travel. Not yet. So here's my question, Kerry. What are some of your not yet destinations?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm hoping in November, December timeframe, because I typically travel over Thanksgiving. I like that time to travel. And I haven't been to Laos, Cambodia, and I've been to Vietnam, but not North Vietnam. So I'm hoping to add that in as well. So I've got a trip tentatively planned. So that'll add like 4 new countries for me. So that's on the bucket list. And other bucket list things would be going back to some of the wonderful places that I have already been, but didn't get to spend enough time.
Definitely.
So, for example, we were filming in Rome in March. We spent 4 weeks there. And other previous trips, a couple days here, a couple days there, and you're just, trying to see as much as you can. But again, that 4 weeks, you can breathe, you
Yeah.
can, see all of those other things. So, some new things combined with some things we've done before and just do it in a different way.
Absolutely. And I agree. There are places I've been that I want to go back. And again, the deep breath, if I want to spend 3 hours wandering around or 3 days really wandering around the gardens of Versailles, I can do that because
Yes.
versus I want to see it, but I've only got 3 hours to see the garden. So now I'm
Right.
kind of, either way is fine. But yes, there
Right.
are those places that you're like, you kind of go, I want to come back here and have more time here. So
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why typically when I go someplace for the first time, it is pretty quick
sure.
because I want to see it. And then I will determine, is this a place I would like to come back and spend more time? Or I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I saw it, but I'm done with it now and I can move on.
Yep. It's I actually heard this line I was traveling over Easter, and I was on a cruise, and the cruise director said it's buffet travel, meaning it's like a buffet where just you have little taste, and then you get to
Yes.
decide that was good. I'd like more of that, and that was okay, but I don't need more of that. And I thought,
Yeah,
well,
that analogy.
I I like that. And yes, what you were just talking about is
Yeah.
sometimes like the buffet. I'm hitting every dish, and I like that one, so I'll come back later for more of that. So
Right. Easter Island was like that. Since you mentioned Easter,
yeah,
loved it, had an amazing time, but it's not something that I need to go back and see again. I've
I
seen it,
yeah,
got great pictures, done.
absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there are
Yeah.
absolutely. I want to say to the audience, there are absolutely places um, that you go and you're happy that you've been there, but you're like, I don't feel that I've seen it. I don't know that there's anything more, or for whatever reason. And that's part of what makes travel great. There are the trips that are spectacular, and there are the other trips that are like, "Well, that was good, but not like, wow, you know, no problem."
Doesn't solidify a place in your heart where you say, I'm called to come back. The
Absolutely. I mean,
lure.
absolutely. And I would say that uh, I really do feel like I have Africa in my heart, because when I've been to South Africa 5 times now, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, I get out there and I'm kind of like, yeah, it kind of feels like part of me is home. That it's just a place that I love so much, and I love to share it. And I love the experience of being surrounded by all of this flora and fauna that is not part of what I have. And um, I've been on this experiment to see how many days of safari is enough. And last time
You
I
haven't
was
hit
on,
the sweet spot yet?
well, I was on 12 days of safari, and it was great, but I still wanted, when I got done, I still wanted more, right?
Okay. Mm.
Because, well, and part of it is, what was great about having all that time was, if you went out and the game viewing just wasn't that good in the morning, you weren't worried about it, because you're like, oh my gosh, I only have 4 game drives, so I want everyone to be like, I want to see, lots of animals. And they're not on your timetable, right? And sometimes you sometimes you're like, oh, there were elephants here, but they're not here anymore, and we don't know where they are right now, or the lions
Right.
were here, but they've wandered off, or they're sitting in the bush and we can't see them. So
Right. It's kind of luck of the draw, isn't it?
it really is. It really is. But again, when you have the time, like you were in Rome, and you're like, now I have time to see something. And if I can't get into whatever uh, museum or whatever today, that's fine. I can come back on Wednesday and do it.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, Kerry, I want to thank you so much. This has been an
Oh,
absolutely epic conversation.
thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And of course, I love to travel anytime, anywhere. So
Clearly. So how can people find you? Where's your YouTube channel? What's it called?
sure, sure. Yeah, please. Our show is on YouTube. So that's Ms. World Traveler.
Okay.
And then, of course, we're on Instagram and Facebook, but Instagram is Kerry, Ms. World Traveler. Kerry, Kerry, Ms. World Traveler, and Facebook, Ms. World Traveler. So,
Cool.
follow our journey. We're having a great time and love to take people along with us.
Absolutely. That is so exciting. Well, Kerry, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk
Thank
with
you.
me and my audience today. Uh, Everyone who's listening, I want to remind you that epic choices lead to the epic life that you want.
Get your gift copy of the award-winning book Epic Begins with One Step Forward at epicbegins.com. That's a wrap on this episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward with your host, Zander Sprague, best-selling author, internationally acclaimed public speaker, and licensed professional clinical counselor. To make your next conference or event epic, send an email to Zander at ZANDER@epicbegins.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Remember, epic choices, epic life.